Hello, I'm Octavius Obi. Welcome. The gentleman I'm in conversation with today is Donald Cassell Jr. Donald is a senior fellow and director of Liberia initiatives at the Sagamore Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana. The mission of the institute is to provide research-based solutions to public policy issues and challenges. Donald, welcome. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Octavius. It's a pleasure to be.
Oh no, the pleasure is all mine, and thanks for doing this. You have an unusual combination in that head of yours, sir. You are an architect as well as a theologian. You have a degree in architecture and theology. So when I was first introduced to you, this doesn't happen often, but the question that popped into my head is there, of course there is, but what is the connection between the spiritual and the physical? But that question sounds kind of academic and bookish. Let me put it another way. Do you see God in buildings?
Yes, what I wanted to say, I was thinking about that when you and I talked earlier on, is basically the spiritual decision is a fundamental decision. So it's what some theologians will refer to as the ground of being. That is a fundamental decision. And then it then influences every other thing in life. So it colors all of life. So you can see that, say, for instance, in a place like India, where Hinduism is in fact a religious or spiritual commitment, and it has, for the most part, dominated the subcontinent for the last 4,000 years or so. So these are fundamental philosophical decisions that then colors everything. And in terms of the building, particularly the aesthetics, the architecture, etc., that kind of thinking can color that considerably. And there are other people who are more skilled in understanding those relationships and have written considerably about that than I can articulate here. I also wanted to make sure about the theologian part of it is that I always like to say I don't mind it being referred to as a theologian, but I like to qualify it that I'm a theologian with a small t. And that is because I have met theologians with capital T, and I know I'm not them. So,
Okay, those of humility there. But let's talk about your origin. You are Liberian. Which part of the country are you from?
Well, I was brought up in Monrovia, Montserrado County area, and so some of my family line, as my maternal family line goes toward Broville area there. And then on, but we have a significant family line also from Bond County. So my grandfather, still on my maternal side, on my mother's side, is from Bond County area, and it's through his line that we have an ancestral village and everything else that we are an integral part of the life of the people there. And when I was a little boy, everybody used to be going and coming and all of that. But Liberia is so complex because on my paternal side, the Cassell, my grandmother, she was from Ivory Coast and partly from Sino. And we had to, as I think I told you a little bit before, we had to pull that out of her, both the Ivory Coast side and the Sino side. In fact, the Sino side, I'm just getting to know that better, to realize that in parts, I still need to confirm it, but my grandmother may very well have been a Pruma.
Have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had only four, my mother and father, and my father was a lawyer in Monrovia area. He did die at a very young age, so he was about 39 when he passed, and my mother was 29. And at that time, we were four children, and the youngest child was 9 months. But we had this grandfather from the maternal side, William Henry Ketter. That was the sort of name they gave him, but he was from Bond County. And I think his name from Bonkani, he did write a little sketch out, was Saki or something like that. And I
Okay.
hope to publish one of these days the sketch of his life. And he stepped in significantly and made life a whole lot better for
Okay.
us than it would have been with our father having passed at such a young age.
Tell me about your best childhood memory in Liberia growing up.
That's a very good question. It was a pleasant time trying to think about it. I would say I really intensely enjoy my family. I always felt really very safe within that environment. And it was not only with the immediate family, that is to say, of course, Liberia, I don't know whether we have quite a definition for immediate family, but I would say so it was not only my brothers and sisters and then my mother, but I'm talking about cousins and aunts and all those things. And so my recollection, my memory there is very pleasant, and I always felt extraordinarily safe amongst them. I didn't sometimes I didn't feel that way always in school. It's not that I was threatened in school. It's just the competition, the way children horseplays with children and teasing and whatnot. I didn't feel always welcome, but I do not recall being like that in my family. I was always greatly honored and welcome in the family by all mother, father. I don't remember the father too well since he died so young, but mother, aunts, cousins, uncles, and those kinds of things.
So you've written extensively on Liberia and Liberia-related issues. One of your works I want to begin looking at now is development as an aesthetic project.
Yes.
And in the summary, you make the argument that leadership has to be somewhat moral.
Yes.
Is that a necessity, or is it possible to have good leadership without necessarily being morally based?
Well, from all that I can see, even outside of the Christian tradition, when you go to the Greco-Roman past or you deal with the Confucian tradition, good leadership is very, very carefully tied to morality. So I'm saying that it's a necessity. I don't see how it could be ordered otherwise. If it's ordered otherwise, it's a threat not only to the people being led, but the leader himself finds himself in a very threatening position without a very strong moral cover. So yes, I would say it's a necessity.
Okay. And the other point you make in the book, I'm going to come back to the moral leadership necessity issue, but I want to quickly summarize. The other point you make in the book is that change has to predominantly come from within the country as opposed to from outside the country.
Yeah, I think my argument here is that you always have the possibility to respond, even if you're an underdog. And Liberia is a small country, and so we participate in a very large anarchic international environment, so to speak, and so we have to be extremely careful. But you still have the responsibility of decision, and I think once you've thought through some of these fundamental things, whereas you cannot totally eliminate the evils that could come to you, I think for the most part you could mitigate the evil. You could either soften its impact or reduce the extent of it. So yes, so I'm saying that lots of our problems are internally generated, and it's not that you don't have outside bad things happening. There are many bad people in this world taking advantage of people, but I'm saying that we need to work on a whole lot of inside things so that in the good times we can exploit it and grow considerably, and in the bad times we can then check the extent to which the evil could negatively influence us.
Mm-hmm. I had a gentleman on the program a couple of weeks ago, Ron Quist. He's a Ghanaian brother, international development specialist. He made the point that if you have good people and you put them to operate in a bad system, the results will be negative because the system is what determines the outcomes in most instances. What's your counter argument to that?
Well, I'm not sure whether there's a counter argument to that because the world is extremely complex. And I know people have argued considerably about systems and agencies. I still remember in seminary where within the Christian tradition, but not only that, there are other traditions that put a whole lot of emphasis on the individual persons and the way and their responsibility. But I still remember this systematic professor saying that even though we say that, we're not denying that the place of institutions can sometimes take on a life of their own and move around and whatnot. But the long and short of it, I'm with Monsieur Jean-Paul Sartre on this thing. Yeah, the institutions are often reflective of the individuals that compose them. So I'm saying that you have bad institutions or bad systems. I mean, where did it come from? If there were people not in the world, if we would just, no one was in this world, there would be no state, there would be no institutions, there would just be the wild things growing all over the place. But these are institutions created by human beings, and they become bad because of the bent nature of human will. And so I still would put the responsibility on that. I think one has to think constructively, especially if you meet a situation that is already negative and bad, and you go in there. It's good to be informed what you have to deal with, how you have to deal with that, and what kind of change you could effect in such a situation like that. All those things need to be worked out. And I don't say this to say it is easy. I don't think it is easy. I'm just saying that I don't think we can hide from the responsibilities that we have as individuals. We created those systems, and we can uncreate them if we want.
You also break the book down into areas of focus to talk about the state, the economy, agriculture, and education. Let's take one of those at a time. Let's start with education, for that matter.
Yes. Well, I guess I have focused. We, of course, the Sagamore and have done a whole lot of work in Liberia. We did establish the Liberian International College. It was not only me going there with the Sagamore. It was really a whole lot of people from Ningmac County, and I just they brought me along. One of them I knew very well, Dr. Sabo, and he brought me along in that. Which I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Part of it, getting it started, and then there's Sagamore research fellows through a whole series of incidents decided to build an agricultural research center there, a demonstration farm, and then eventually developed the program into a bachelor's of general agriculture at college. There's still a college, not a university yet. So we've done that. My own approach to it is that education has to be moral, and generally I emphasize character through all my work, character development, spirituality, and intellectuality. I think that is important, and I'm not the only one to say that. I think people like quote that I like very much, and I quote from him, a novelist called Herman Hesse in his book, The Glass Bead Game, says a whole lot of very good things about that. And in many ways, he looks back at ancient orders, both East and West, as focusing his educational focus being on spirituality and intellectuality. And I think that is important. The reason why I even focus a whole lot on character development issues is that I think character development issues are even more important than just smarts. So I think you have a more successful situation if you have people with great character than people with all kinds of bookish notion or intellectuals.
So agriculture, another important pillar.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, my friends who have been the real experts here in terms of the nitty gritty and the science of it did a whole lot of work there. But myself, I've just written primarily on the policy, how we could use it as a foundation for the economy, so to speak. And in looking at it, some of the case studies that we've done, I think I first heard it from an African economist, I think out of Zimbabwe. It was Zama. She wrote a book called Dead Aid, and she had mentioned that New Zealand is one of the few modern states that have been building essentially on agriculture. And I think we need to. I've done a case study of New Zealand. It's probably come beyond that point now, but for a long time, that was the chief export of New Zealand. Was doing agriculture, and I see it as a low-hanging fruit. I think it is something that we can immediately reach out to. We don't need all kinds of sophisticated environment. This is what majority of our people are involved in terms of employment. And if we can rationalize a little bit, bring a whole lot more scientific techniques to bear on it, we can make it work. And by scientific techniques, I'm not suggesting we need to start with sophisticated equipment and massive research and all that kind of stuff like that. We can start smaller than that, but to keep in mind just some of the progress that have been made so that we can more quickly move beyond subsistence farming and those kinds of things like that.
So I'm sure you would not be surprised, or I'm sure you are aware of the nature and extent of research that's out there, not only in terms of researching education, but researching agriculture as well. So the body of knowledge is out there. And despite the availability of that body of knowledge, we still have problems with implementation, having a good educational system in Liberia, having agriculture, be prominent. So there clearly is a gap between the body of knowledge and implementation. How do we bridge that gap?
That is why I have often focused on education, the schooling, the college, the leadership workshop that I conduct, is that I feel that people are in fact our greatest resources. And if we can work with people, then you can build everything up. You can talk to that way. We don't have implementation because we don't have the people with the will to do these things. And I don't want to put it so much. It does have to do with will a whole lot. Always the way I put it is that how are you understanding the world and how are you understanding your place in the world? So yes, these things are out there, but we still need a way of appreciating what our calling, our vocation is in the world to be able to take advantage of these things. And so I do what I do because I'm trying to stimulate that, trying to get people, Liberian people, African people, to understand the extent of their responsibility and embrace that responsibility. So yeah, I think that's the key, trying to get people to appreciate that. It means that it's a long process. It's gonna take some time to work through it. I do not suspect that perhaps in my lifetime that I will see it the way I would like to see it. I mean, one can be with Singapore. You take a country like Singapore that was at Liberia level, maybe even lower, and you get a phenomenal leader like Lee Kuan Yew, and before he retires, it's declare a modern state. That's an extraordinary accomplishment. So people don't usually do that.
We're going to come back and talk about the state here just a little bit, Donald, but let me pause to talk to my listeners for about 15 seconds now.
Okay.
The nature and the quality of the conversation we're having here, you're not going to get it in a lot of places on the internet, especially about Africa, about Liberia. So I'm asking you to go and subscribe to the channel, and that will help our algorithms, and YouTube will in turn send a lot of viewers to our videos. Our mission is to bridge the gap between the diaspora, the global African diaspora, and the continent. Today, I'm in conversation with Donald Cassell. Donald is a senior fellow and director of Liberia initiatives at the Sagamore Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana. Let's get back to the conversation. Before I interrupted you, you were about to talk about the state and the importance of the state. You left off with the example of Singapore. which
Yes,
was at
I'm saying that it really was an incredible accomplishment to have within a lifetime. But I saw him do there. I did not think it could happen within a lifetime. I did not think that you could take a state from that level and within one person's lifetime have it develop state declare before you die. So it's basically a sort of a 30, 40 years career. That is an extraordinary accomplishment, and that's a good place to look. But I'm not saying that we all have to do it that way. And it may be for us, it may take a little longer to do that. But if we are moving in the same trajectory, we could do something rather significant. And there are ways in looking at the way he did it that we can collapse the time. I think you can collapse the time considerably if you have very good partners that you can work with and bring them in to help you. They'll cut down the time it'll take you to learn the same thing or get the same kind of networks, etc. And I would say that was not the only thing he did, but that was a significant part of what he did to expand his network and look for very good partners. And of course, he had a clear vision where he wanted to go, so you bring partners on who can in fact get you there and things like that. So
you talk about Lee Kuan Yew, it's the network, partners, vision. There must be other things that he did without, in summarizing, what are some of the important things that Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore that we could emulate not only in Liberia but across the continent?
Well, I think one of the network, of course, the vision. He, I mean, in some respect, this is what I'm saying. Whether if it's an extraordinary performance, how to follow that. One can still learn it. I mean, in the Christian church, we point to the God man as an example, and we tell everybody you need to be like the God man. And Lee Kuan Yew is, of course, far from that. So I'm saying that even though I see him as really an extraordinary individual, brilliant, perhaps almost sage-like in many ways, he nevertheless is a good example for us to follow. And one of the things that I think that I saw very strong in his life is that first he was actually quite brilliant. I mean, there were a whole lot of technical matters concerning state policies and economy and whatnot that he understood. I'm not sure how well I understand some of those things that he did understand. That's an issue. And then I think where he didn't, he was able to bring in a whole lot of partners. Well, even if he did, you can't do everything yourself. You still need people who can help you along with it. I do think he had a very clear moral compass. For whatever reason, that was a highly focused moral compass. Wife, children, ethics within the state, lack of corruption, etc. It was almost like the business we are about is very serious and we will not compromise it. And then he was very hardworking. And that perhaps that is part of the moral compass. So you can be without a moral compass and still be very, very hardworking. But he was very, very hardworking. Maybe for some people it may have been too much, almost driven to see Singapore become something like that. But some kind of very strong work ethic. He also privileged his Confucian background, though I think he couldn't quite privilege that only, and he acknowledges that for him to have even acknowledged boldly the assistance that he got from the British, their administrative and legal system that he thought was pretty helpful. And he says this in a public address in receiving Mrs. Thatcher in the state dinner when he acknowledges that. But the Confucian tradition also play a key role too, in tradition of scholarship and family and all that kind of stuff like that was also important to those kinds of things.
So some people might say that Singapore is so far away. Let's look at and granted the achievements there are beyond legendary. Let's look at African examples on a continent that might be a little more closer to home. Rwanda comes to mind.
Yes, Rwanda is a good example, and I don't think we should diminish that. However, I don't want us, and Rwanda is an excellent example. The Sagamore does a whole lot of work with Rwanda, and we really do like Paul Kagame and the work that he does there and how well he's used the investment of the country, aid and whatnot, really apply it appropriately. I don't want to diminish that in the least. I think it is a worthy example, if nothing else, how you run state very well and with a degree of integrity, moral integrity. However, I don't want us to feel too much that it needs to be African. So what I'm saying is that we could look at Singapore, and not only because it's Asian, I mean, there are some emotional ties to it that I always use in it rather than using a European example. But what I wanted to say was that I think we must not allow nationalism to skew our vision here. And so if you look at Singapore and it becomes for you a major example, so be it, especially if it's helping you, because Singapore itself, one of the things, real remarkable things about Lee is that there was a conscious decision not to look too closely around him. He didn't see his neighborhood as a place to emulate. He didn't want to. So he looked at developed countries in Europe and other countries about the same size as a model. And in doing that, of course, he did appreciate he was in Asia, not in Europe. But doing that, it helped immensely. Now he's become an example of a state in Asia that never denied that they were not Asian, but he was not burdened by that, so much so that was the only place he could look. He didn't. He looked beyond Asia and was conscious that his environment did not afford him very good examples. And so you can look away from that. And I'm saying that that's a way to think, that's a strategic way, but nevertheless, Rwanda is in fact a very good example. And I have written in the book on a case study of Rwanda. And I've used other countries, I particularly like Kenya. I feel Kenya being a bit more democratic, and where we are as Liberians with all the debate and the arguments that we like to go in the Kenya and in Ghana and places like that may be a better example for us than maybe Rwanda with a more centralized, highly centralized and authoritative type of government structure there. I think maybe
at the end of the day, our goal is development, or whether it's centralized or not, right?
Well, yes. Again, I mean, one of the things that I was looking at there was a book I read some time ago, and they were talking about some of the inefficiencies within the U.S. system, and it is a very inefficient system. It is. And I think people were complaining about that years ago. It could be handled so much better. But the argument that somebody made was that the founding fathers of the United States were not interested in efficiency. They were interested in freedom. So the question we need to ask ourselves, I don't know whether it needs to be as stark as that. I don't want to go there and say we have one choice or the other. I do not think that. I'm just brought it up to say maybe for Liberians, not that we depreciate efficiency and those kinds of stuff, development, we're not appreciating that. But on our route there, we want to be very careful about our freedoms. And it can be debated, but I'm not sure that is necessarily an unreasonable argument. Okay. It's a reasonable argument.
What are your thoughts on the role of the economy?
Well, I mean, let me see if I do think we need to try to bring a whole lot of international partners in. I think they will cut short how much we could develop that place in a short space of time. And I think we need to think fairly carefully about our relationship with the United States. I think that we are not using that relationship very well. And I'm not suggesting that it only depends upon us. And I read enough and seen some Liberian officials and some of the struggles they've had dealing with the United States. But I think the fact that we are so closely tied with this very great country, I think if we strategically think through the process more carefully, we could economically benefit with that relationship. And at this point, I'm not sure that we are exploiting it very much. But yes, in terms of the economy, explore our partnership particularly with the United States, explore our partnerships with other nations that could be friendly to us. I noted in a security pact that I think maybe it might be good, and I will publish this later on, for us to develop very important relationships with nations in Asia that are part of the U.S. allied states. It may be easier for us to work with those nations than to work maybe directly with the United States. So there's a whole lot we could do with South Korea. There's a whole lot we could do with Singapore. There's a whole lot we could do with Japan. But this takes a whole lot of investment and strategic thinking as to how we could do something like that. And when we do that, I think it will accrue to the benefits of the Liberian people and to the benefit of the economy, give us a more robust economy.
So you use the words strategic thinking in two different places there, in our relationship with the United States and in our relationships with the countries in Asia. For an ordinary guy listening, that might be a little bit vague, though. Give us some specifics in terms of how we manage the relationship with the United States and how we manage relationships with the countries in Asia.
That is a very good thing. I'm not sure. I mean, I know something should happen, but I'm not going to. I just began just a rough sketch of policy, 6,000 words that I hope I can begin to make known to the world. Dealing with that, I think what we might want to do is that firstly seek a security pact with them. And what I mean by that is how best can we train our people in the security sector to be able to secure the state for ourselves and against outside threats. That would be one thing we could do. And maybe the United States being involved in all over the world and whatnot, that may not be something they may be too interested in, or they may not hold us as responsible. But I think they will, in many ways, with the work they're doing now in Africa, some of the stuff around the Sahel. We could work through the modalities of that, all of the details of what that would mean. And it could, I'm not saying necessarily that. I know there have been lots of resistance about the possibility of a U.S. base in Liberia. I know during President Sirleaf's time that was brought, and lots of opposition was against that. But we may want to consider that, especially if they want to consider it. They may not want to consider it any longer, but if they want to consider it, that is something I think we should talk to them about and see if we can work something out. And that then follows with all of the other security cooperations with the other Asian countries that are important to us. And we have lots of valuable things that they may want in our country, all kinds of minerals and materials that they could invest, so that as they're coming to do that, our exchange will primarily be on basically training our people. I will focus on that. I think that is what I saw Lee do. He didn't put all kinds of restrictions of trade within this country, but he did insist on the development of Singaporeans in those various high-tech corporations and things like that. And when it was all said and done, Singapore became an integral part of that network. And I think that's something we can do. Now, this is just general. We still need experts, a whole lot of technical people, legal people, good, clear legal minds, economists who know a whole lot more than I do, financiers, etc. But this is a broad picture. And then they can go through the nitty gritty, and they may know more than I do and modify this vision maybe significantly more than I can appreciate at this.
Well, I'm sure you are aware that there was a time Liberia was up there in terms of relationship and the security alliances with the United States. And then at the end of the Cold War, we sort of fell out of favor, for lack of a better term. Do you think that recent developments in the sub-region, in Sahel, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, do you think developments in those countries are causing people on this side of the Atlantic to reconsider and perhaps look at countries like Liberia differently now?
I think so, but we still have a whole lot of work to do with Liberia in terms of it's a very weak state. You know, I'm happy that we have not had any trouble recently since 2003. I'm very grateful, and I think I think we are beyond the major troubles. We still have some anomalies here and there, but I think we're beyond that. I think we've turned a corner, which I'm very grateful for. But we still have a fairly weak state. When you look at U.S. policies all over the world, since it's not overtly a colonial empire, means that for those policies to work, they always have to have very good domestic partners. So almost every place where you see that those U.S. Partnerships have been immensely successful, it has been because of the strong domestic partners that they have had that have made it very successful. And in Liberia, we need something like that. There needs to be a clear thought where we are with the United States. I think the Liberian people themselves, every time you take polls and surveys, etc., I think the Liberian people, in their way of thinking, and all of us who've gotten educated and whatnot, it's basically there is a strange emotional, historical ties there. And I'm saying, rather than fight it, let's go ahead and embrace it. I'm not sure that the drop-in of Liberia after the Cold War, less important, happened only after the Cold War. I think there were some concerns in the 1970s with the policies that President Talbot was pursuing, the foreign policies that I'm not sure exactly, but often I am concerned about those policies. I think I've expressed that both in the book that I just published, and I intend to write a whole lot more on that. But I think those policies were not, it was emotive. It was pushed by a romanticism, sort of like when you look back at it. Liberia and President Talbot in particular and his administration got caught up with the whole romance of African independence. And that is a good thing, the African independence. But the question you still have to consider is, what are the practical, strategic decisions we need to make here to still make us, it cause us to continue to bloom and prosper And I'm not sure. I think too often people were taken over by a kind of romance and blinded them to what the world was like and who you were dealing with and all those kinds of things like that. And I think it took us where we find ourselves right now. In fact, I think
you've intimated.
Go ahead.
President Talbot's view of the world at the time,
yes,
was bedeviled by romanticism of African independence. But that was, how could he have thought about something else? That being the predominant issue on the continent at the time. And the other point you made to me off the record is that you in terms of the security of the state, you said that he failed in terms of maintaining security in the state. Is that a fair criticism of President Talbot?
I think so. I mean, there was a very long speech given by one of his relatives that I read, and I think that relative, and I put it in the book that I recently published, he acknowledged that was a very weak point. What I'm suggesting is that it's not that you cannot do or say what he did or said. I'm just saying that you need to consider the consequences where these things put you when you do and say these things. So, for instance, in talking with you, there's lots to say about Ahmed Sekou Touré. That's a real problem, and we can all argue the kind of tyrannical way Guinea was governed and all of that. Looking back at it, I still get the impression that when Sekou Touré defiled France and Charles de Gaulle, I sense that he knew, he grasped what it was that he was dealing with. That once you had made that decision, you became responsible for yourself in a way that you were not before. And now you needed to carefully watch your back. Very, very carefully. And I'm saying, like, what's going on right now? I haven't followed it too closely, but what's going on in Senegal with the new government and all this stuff against France and all of that. Yes, I mean, this is independent people. You make the decisions you want to make, etc. I'm hoping that as they file France and kick them out, that they have thought through what that means. What does it mean to deal with a major partner like that? Get rid of him or her and throw them out of the country, have them close down their bases, uh, remove tear up secret agreements that you have with them. I'm saying you can go ahead and do that. You're independent, you're sovereign people, but you need to count the costs. So who are you going to sell to? Maybe you want to change, you sell to the Chinese, I guess, to Turkey or to Russia or something like that. But you need to strategically think through this. In all that I have read of Liberia and even President Talbot's response to the US and whatnot, I'm not sure that the cost-benefit analysis was taken into account. If you break these secret agreements with people, these are not love relationships. What do you think will happen?
So you basically say take actions as an independent country, as independent peoples, but consider the consequences as well.
Precisely.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not arguing with whether your decision is meritorious or not. We can argue about that, and maybe in council, I might think otherwise. But I'm saying once you make that decision, understand what you've done and understand that you need to account for it. You need to always, all decisions go through the cost benefit analysis. And where does it benefit you and where does it not? And how does that affect your country? And is this a good idea or is it not? You got to go through those things.
So one of my favorite musicians from Nigeria, I'm going to break the level of seriousness in the dialogue by making a musical reference. Prince Nico Mbaraga, he said that as you make your bed, so shall you lie on it. But let me come back to another point you made in one of your other books, Liberia Country Profile, an Experiment in Statecraft. You argue that there is a sort of a binary view of Liberia and a sort of reductionist in the sense that we look at people who came to the country and people who were there, and that has informed our thinking. What's the alternative, and how does that alternative help Liberia?
Well, I think the alternative I tried to articulate in the book is to see Liberia as a rich diversity of African peoples and their international partners. It means that there will be influence from all over the place. If I'm not mistaken, Elwood Dunn have seen certain things not quite as clear, but maybe the references have been to the tripartite culture. And I think he got it from Ali Musuri, if I'm not mistaken, that saw Africa as a tripartite culture where you have Western influence and Christian thinking on the continent, and then you deal with Islam, and then you deal with African traditional practices. And I'm saying that in parts, that represents some of the complexities of Liberia. It can be argued back and forth, and want to be careful here, but one could argue back and forth which of those traditions are dominant. But I'm saying essentially that is the complex mix, and it's not only from a religious or philosophical standpoint. I think that's how we live. I mean, that is how my family life is structured. I just mentioned I do have relatives, the Banks and others in Broville, a whole lot of people around that settlement. But we do have an ancestral village in Kwata. My sister, husband, who's European, died, and she buried him there, and all of that. And we still actively work with the people there, all kinds of things. And she is doing a whole lot of work there in that area. And of course, we still maintain a very active part with the people in Broville and Montserrat County also. And I don't think necessarily that I'm unique in this. I think this is how lots of Liberian people are. It's always been like that. I mean, even some of my friends that we started the college together, I've been surprised to know that my friend, I think he's Guillermo, but his wife is a Pele woman. You know, and I mean, when you get upset, who are you going to be killing now? You can go after your wife, people, and then and then that's the kind of tribal background my family has, also from county other people. And then I met another guy who was the head of the inland church, and his wife was a Banks. That he had married years ago, and I'm sure that if I were to push the question with her father probably Banks, but may have married somebody, had the liaison with somebody up around the Bao Bong or something like that. And I'm saying that's the complicated nature. It's a complicated social environment, and it's a complicated religious and philosophical environment. And I think it's good for us to appreciate the complications like that rather than rather than making these binary groups, like you have one group that is Congo people and the other country. I think those are not helpful things. Even if my suggestion is wrong, I'm saying that that binary way of viewing things have led us such a violent cul-de-sac that I'm saying for the sake of a more robust, more flourishing people, we need to rethink it.
Mm-hmm. I said at the onset that you work for the Sagamore Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the mission of the institute is to make research-based recommendations to public policy issues in Africa. The question that follows from that is, what are some of the specific policy issues that the institute has recommended, and have they been implemented?
That's a very good question. Again, I would say that the approach here has been to focus on education. So the emphasis is considerably on human capacity development. And the human capacity development here is not only in terms of technical and professional skills, it's also how you understand the world and how you understand yourself within the world. So within that rubric, what I'm doing is really a practical manifestation. So I do not depend specifically on the state apparatus, though I know you cannot necessarily operate out of it, but I'm looking for how we can address this in private circles, private corporations, private institutions like schools and universities, etc., and doing those kinds of things. So, for instance, the work concerning agriculture, the thrust is to how to improve agricultural practices in the country. But that has been done right there in a demonstration farm, LICC in Ghana. And again, the specifics of that, I hope my colleagues were here, they could tell you more specifically some of the things they've done. The larger state impact, I'm not sure yet that we have had as much responses as we would like, though we have had Liberian heads of state visit the Agricultural Research Center, both Mrs. Salif as well as President Weah visited the Agricultural Research Center, which tells me at least that this is of interest to them and they see it as somewhat valuable. But I'm still looking at major state interests and seeing I think where I have been, I've seen great success, but it's not only me, it was lots of other Liberian people hitting on that. It's the recent dual citizenship thing. I wrote about it, and I think it's in that book, if I'm not mistaken, the National Development as an Aesthetic Project. I think it's in that book where I talk about the need to develop to go toward dual citizenship. And not only that, but really they have met a whole lot of the concerns that I had, the movement toward dual citizenship, but also not only for Liberians who had to leave because of the crisis, but for other international people. Now, I think for the most part, it's still happening through Liberians and their spouses. So if your wife is or husband is from outside of Africa, they can still become citizen of Liberia. And that's a limitation, but I still think it is better than what we had before. So I would say, looking back at that, that is one of the thing that really makes my heart very happy, that was in fact. But I was not the only one. There was lots of other Liberians that had issues with that.
One of the things I like about academic types like you is when you attempt to use ordinary expressions or even storytelling, as opposed to the quantitative research-based highbrow kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
One of the points you make is that in telling a Liberian story, you say that you make the comparison about telling the Liberian story to a couple and how telling a story determines the trajectory of a particular story. That origin stories can be predictive, they can be constraining as well as explanatory. Expound on that a little bit for us.
Well, I think the conflagration that we got into with the military coup and the subsequent destruction of the state, it came from very bitter and negative narrative. And the bitter and negative narrative didn't see fundamentally any other solution except a violent revolution. So it still didn't work out as well. You see the violent revolution of French. It was not controlled eventually. Napoleon and others in control of it. The violent revolution in Russia was much more controlled. And they will be, from what I learned, they were learning from the French that somehow the revolutionaries lost control of it. But in Liberia, the violent revolution, those advocating that never seemed to truly gain control of the revolution. Nevertheless, the violence that was unleashed was very negative. And the story that led to that did not take into account all of the relationships that have existed amongst the complex of African people and the international partners that lived in that situation. And it led us to that trajectory because that story was too negative. That was a very negative story. And I'm saying what we might want to focus on is the stories where we cooperated, where there were more blessings. So, for instance, I particularly appreciate Dr. Patrick Borrow's work, his historical studies and whatnot, because I sense in those works an attempt to see where cooperation did occur, where there were lots of things that were done together, etc., that there was a unified purpose for the state structure. I mean, even the whole idea of slavery, wanting to pat down the slavery that was going on that part of the West African coast, and the state that was established was as a buffer to that. And I'm saying that is a better story of establishing a modern state structure that will benefit everybody. And it may not be perfect, but it's almost like my approach is more like Great Britain and its history. It's more a very excellent example of gradualism, so that you have all these activities and then a series of legislation, acts of parliaments that redressed a whole lot of injustices in the country, continue where you don't have clear losers and winners like that. Which unfortunately we didn't. Everybody lost in this case, but you don't have clear losers and winners. So you have people bitter, but rather you do things that bring the country together. And I'm saying if we can develop a storyline like that, I think the hope for the future is bright. You're dealing with a more positive future. It doesn't mean you have arrived in heaven or it's going to be a perfect situation, but it's a narrative that does not eat itself alive, but it's a narrative that is creative and is moving toward solutions that benefits everybody. That's where
But
I'm going with that.
given our natural inclination as human beings,
Yes.
and this is somewhat of a pessimistic view. One would argue that the natural state of the human condition is to feed off and to want to hear and to want to say bad things, right? And doing something good requires effort, requires moral education.
Yes.
How do we, in terms of our everyday lives now as Liberians, how do we try to make that change?
Well, I want to say first, going against that pessimism bit, one of the things that I'm from a Protestant group with the Reform, John Calvin, and all those things that have dealt a whole lot, have not taken, they don't think mildly about the negative nature of human nature. So it's not, they're not going to play games with that. However, the argument is that humanity is not bad as it could be. There's still worse things that people could do. And one of the 20th century scholars, at least that I can recall, but I think he represents the whole tradition, emphasized that in spite of all that human beings have done, a man is still made in the image of God. She is not devil. So they're capable of evil things, but they're also capable of noble things. And I want to remember both those things as I work with human society, whether it's here in the United States or in Liberia. That people can in fact do many good things. People do in fact like to do many good things, and I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to see how we can encourage that. For myself, I think I always say the man or the woman is the message. Is how you conduct yourself and do your business that will be instructive to the people you're working with in Liberia or here. And if you are not overwhelmed by negativity, I think they will learn a whole lot about what a more noble view of the world. It doesn't mean that you may not be hurt. Bad things. We live in a fallen world, so bad things do still happen to many good people. But there are many good things that we can do, and the Christian thinking is that with the coming of the Christ in the world, Saint Augustine, the city of God, is that goodness has come into the world, that can be cultivated, that can be bear witness to, and people can in fact see that. Again, I mean, even if you look at other cultures, there were areas where there's lots of prosperity and richness that occur, whether it's Japan or China or Europe. And there were periods when very many very negative things occur. And I'm seeing, at least for me, I'm trying to, even though I know I live in a fallen world, I want work. I'm committed to working to seeing the good come about as much as I possibly can. And it happens to do with teaching and all those kinds of things. Yeah.
You know what my response to that is?
Yes.
That is a theologian with a big T that's coming out. Because in the beginning you said it was a small T.
It is a small T. I mean, if you compare.
The beauty of we should describe that just now,
Yes.
designed to with the goodness of man and all of that. But let me pause again to remind my audience that only 10% of you guys subscribe to the channel. Look at this kind of conversation, the nature, the beauty, the depth, the level of intellect, the level of teaching that we're getting from Donald Cassell from the Sagamore Institute in Indiana. You are not going to get that kind of conversation on many places on the internet. So we ask that you please subscribe to the channel, and this will encourage the work that we do. We put in the time, the energy, and resources to bring this kind of conversation to you free of charge. All you have to do is just simply subscribe to the channel, and that will be your contribution to encouraging us to do the work here. Let me come back to the conversation with Donald again. I know you have some interesting views on sports and religion, but let me bring in China before we end with sports and religion. But what are your thoughts on China in modern Africa?
Well, right now I'm working on a paper trying to improve it and work on it a little bit more to deal with what I'm calling it as a comparative study between U.S. and China in Africa. Again, I think that African people should be strategic and practical in their thinking in dealing with China. The struggle with China is that the CCP, we don't really know specifically their ultimate policy interests, but we can hazard guesses and think that they want to be the next hegemon in the world. And we always need to keep that in mind. And in that quest, I think, again, I'm saying that carefully, I think they would like to, Africa is a strategic asset to them. Again, this is not a love relationship. It's just that they somehow see it as you have the chess on the board, and that are the pieces on the chessboard, that Africa is a part of a strategic asset to acquire. That's an advantage for us because I think the Western people, in spite of the fact that many of us have been educated by them and we have this emotional tie to them, I'm not sure that they see it as important as that. I don't think they see us as a strategic asset. Again, that's something, one can argue about whether you want people to see you like that. But China does, and the US and lots of its allies are likely there because China is there. So from a general security standpoint, you say to yourself, given what happened to China itself in terms of the 300 years of humiliation, the semi-colonial status, etc., you never want to not know what's going on. China was so secure, just didn't care too much about these people. It's a bunch of barbarians, and that very barbarian that you're rejecting because you don't know what he's doing could be the person that comes and passes by. So we've learned that is China's great mistake. No one wants to make that mistake again. So they're there. The U.S. not sure why they're there, but the U.S. is going to be there so they're not caught by surprises. They don't want to be surprised again. In terms of what the Africa, that's one of the things we're looking at. I'm saying that we need to look at what value we get. Chinese always talk about the win-win situation, and that is a good thing to talk about, a win-win situation. So we need to understand what it is that we want for them, for our larger development interest, and work China in that. And the relationship tends to mostly be, I think for right now, transactional. I'm not saying that they are not, they may have the state model, the model of statecraft that they're using. I'm not sure. I don't think they would be disappointed if we copy that there, but I'm not sure that is being sold very heavily. I think the interest is primarily a transactional need. Some things you have, agriculture, minerals, or whatever else you have, and they want to buy that from you, and they have these large infrastructure projects that they build for you, or they are interested in your markets, in expanding their growing international reach. Some of their, they call it the going out policy, especially for the early companies that would come in and try out Africa as a safe environment to see how well you do internationally before you begin to expand and compete more seriously with Europe and other Asian states. That's the level of their interest. And I'm saying we shouldn't just be sitting dark. We should be thinking, okay, what do we want from these people ourselves? And we should get to know them better. We should study their culture, their history. I think for the most part, for all these problems, we know the Western people generally are fairly well, so to speak, but I'm not sure we understand China as well. And I think that should be our response. They want to trade with us. Who are we trading with? They want to buy simple things. We have some things to sell, but always be on your guard. Yes, keep careful watch on them so that we know that the relationship does not go further than what we really want. We don't want surprises, essentially. We want to keep a close eye on them, and we don't want to be surprised by their actions, etc. So that's my position. I think they are doing some things for us, and We are doing some things for them, and the question that we need to be, and I'm putting the onus on Africa, how can we benefit from what they want to do on the continent? And I think we could benefit. We could benefit immensely, but we need to think through it carefully. And again, that word, strategically.
I'm a sports head. Outside of this, one of the biggest things I like is sports. Where do you see sports in the whole national ethos? Have we been able to handle it and leverage it to our benefit as a people?
I'm not sure that we have done as well. This is one of those low-hanging fruits that we could leverage, especially for a deeper integration and reconciliation and all those kinds of stuff. Sports could be used for that, and I'm not sure that we've done that well. I know for myself, from a private standpoint, I have a good friend. He's very much involved with the Olympics. And, he ran in the Olympics at one time, Kute Maui. I don't know, you know Kute. He was about that. Very good. He's helped me quite a bit with lots of stuff here at Sagamore. And he's done a whole lot of work in that area. And there's some Christian ministry called, I think, Association of Christian Athletes, a fellowship of Christian athletes that
I think
managed.
Kute has also been one of the managers for the national team. He's one of the guys who are behind Liberia's recent success in the last few years on the track and field.
Yes.
He himself was an Olympian, but not only that, he's devoted a lot of time to develop track and field in Liberia.
Yes. So he's done a whole lot of work in that area. I think there's more work. I mean, there's so much you can do that I'm sure he recognizes. He's focused on Olympics and that kind of preparation because as one person, I mean, it's already taken quite a bit of time, and he has had to raise basically millions of dollars essentially to keep that thing functioning and whatnot through a foundation and all that. So but yet, I mean, that's only one person, but yet there's a whole lot of work. I know, again, looking at Singapore, what they've done is that they have developed neighborhood community centers where you can have gymnasiums and where people can play table tennis, all kinds of different stuff like that. That we could use that to draw people together again. And maybe we don't start with every neighborhood, but you have a strategic location, put some in Montserrat County, and then move around the various counties and develop that, and develop even leagues, cultivate that, spend a whole lot of money, and use sports not only for reconciliation and integration and greater unity amongst Liberian people, but it could be a conduit for which you could teach a whole lot about character development and spirituality. Like I said, the Fellowship of Christian Athlete, I did introduce them to a guy there. I think George Plamo is his name. And so far, Plamo has been running with that because he has done a whole lot of work just within that area. Before he even met them, he was all by himself doing a whole lot of stuff and made that contact. So yes, I would be very happy about that. I do think board games should be introduced. I always thought that chess. I saw one really remarkable film called The Queen of Katwa. Something. It was about small ministry that introduced a board game
in East Africa somewhere. There?
Yes, it was rich. Why shouldn't we do
Queen
that?
Of
You can get pretty simple. You can get. I think we can shoulder that cost, and it shouldn't be very much. In fact, we could get people coming to that country that will not cost us anything in terms of both the state or private individuals, and they would do it if we just provided them the administrative support that they need to do that. Plus, I always wanted to introduce the Chinese game of Go because I thought that it focused a whole lot on.
Do you play Go? Do you play it?
I don't. I've read about it and seen some of the mysterious movies, and there was a great Japanese writer who wrote about Go, and I read that, but I have not played Go. I do. I mean, if you know somebody that can teach me it, I guess I can always go on the internet and learn it. But that is something I think would be good. And the main reason why I'm even more about it is that the game focus a whole lot on personal development and growth. So you still have strategy and all that, but really it's like this. The main strategy here is growing immensely. as an individual or as a state. So, and that's the strategy I'm seeing for Liberia also.
And
How do we develop ourselves to become increasingly secure within the world? It's hard to say that. It's just difficult to talk about security.
how do you see religion in the whole development process, given the multiplicity of sects within Christianity, and you have Islam and the current, recent, really severed nature of the relationship between Christianity and Islam? One would argue, and quite reasonably, that that could be sort of divisive, though, right?
It could be if you push it too far. I mean, and I think so far, even in the First Republic, it was not divisive. In the First Republic, I think the main time I remember any major violence occurring was during the interaction, the situation in 1980 and some of the civil conflagrations that occurred. But before that time, people seem to have gone about their business. I'm not going to underplay it that these are underlying philosophical and religious differences, but I think one can deal with it, and you don't have to deal with it harshly as the Western people have done in terms of the secularism and the coarseness of secularism that has been introduced into society. You can still have an underlying culture that still celebrate these values, which have proven quite successful for human beings. I guess I'm saying we can work with it, but I'm not suggesting that it's easy to work with it.
Okay.
I understand all the perils and the minefields here and there, but I think if we are careful, we can at least, in terms of one state, as St. Augustine said in the City of God, live at peace with people who might think very differently than you.
I've read so much of your works in the last few days preparing for this,
Yes.
and I've actually forgotten where I read, but I remember very well you said that somewhere that Liberia is not just a country, it's a philosophical idea and an example. What do you mean by that? And how can we manifest that in a positive way for our country?
Yes. Well, I think just the whole nature of Liberia, there are a couple of things going on. I think one thing is that the whole idea of freedom. It's a celebration there of human freedom. And human freedom is, I think the way Immanuel Kant said, and I said it in another thing, he says that there are, I think, three places for human philosophy. And you can see it's not only philosophy, it's also for human civilization. One is the reality of God. That's a major theme in human society. The other theme that major civilizations have dealt with has been the immortality of the human soul. And then the third one has been, what does it mean for human beings to be free? The meaning of human freedom. Those are the three major themes that philosophy treats for, and I'm seeing any major civilization or any civilization group treats of it. And so with Liberia, the thing that is being dealt with there, not denying the place of God, because it was at least there was some acknowledgement of that within the first Republic Constitution. It was not a legal proclamation, but there was nevertheless an acknowledgement of the role of God. And I think even in this second constitution, it's still overt in a way that it cannot easily be denied either. So, but what I'm saying, given Liberia, its history in some respect, we are still discussing what does it mean to be free. That's the major thing. And then it trickles down to Africa. Yeah, that's why I said the experiment in statecraft. This is an attempt to establish a state, a modern nation state on the west coast of Africa. That is a philosophical proposition. Can this be done? Should it be done? Right now, I think the general consensus is that it should be done, and we are trying to do it. So those are the larger themes that I think I had in mind when I wrote that comment: the meaning of human freedom and the burden of state that we have.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Donald L. Cassell Jr., Senior Fellow, Director of Liberia Initiatives at the Sagamore Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana. Thank you so much for doing this today, brother.
My pleasure. Thank you, Octavius. I really appreciate you having me on show, and I still have some more work. Like if I live, I'll do. I think I've planned so far 5 books. I've written 2, and
Okay.
I hope in time, if I live, I'll write the other 3. If not, then that's just it, I guess.
I'm predicting that you will live, and I will talk again sometime in the near future about the works the stuff you're working on right now. Thank you again.